It was around 10 a.m. I was sitting at my desk in the office, looking at a photograph I held in my hands. It was a picture of a woman hugging a 7-year-old girl, my wife Sarah and our daughter Emma. They were smiling happily and waving at the camera. I missed them terribly. It had been almost 6 months since I'd seen them in person. Despite frequent video calls, deep down, I yearned for their warm, living embraces. I've been working as a ranger in the national park for 10 years. My job starts with the first warm days of spring and continues until autumn, when the park fills with visitors eager to enjoy nature. Now, another season was coming to an end, just 2 weeks left, and I could finally return home. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud bang. I turned around and saw my partner sitting nearby, banging on the table, holding his smartphone in one hand and gesturing wildly with the other. "Those damn idiots lost again, you know, Jack," he addressed me. I really believed in them this time. Thought I'd make some good money. The odds were too good to pass up. Damn, I bet too much. He kept shouting, cursing the entire team, their coach, and their ancestors. I decided to calm him down. "Take it easy, Bob. You know our bosses don't approve of gambling. If they find out, you'll be in serious trouble." "Sorry," he said, looking around cautiously and lowering his voice. "Lately, I've been on a losing streak, and it's driving me crazy. Last night we played poker at old Dylan's place, and can you believe it? Not a single decent hand the entire game, just 2 pairs at most. Damn, what's going on?" I nodded disapprovingly, not endorsing my friend's hobby. He pulled out a pack of snacks, opened them, and began eating, washing them down with coffee. I looked at him. He didn't look great lately. Dark circles under his eyes, a bulging belly, and a double chin, but he still remained energetic. That's why everyone at work loved him, for his restless and cheerful nature. Our daily routine was interrupted by a knock. Patrick stood in the doorway, looking disapprovingly at Bob, who was brushing snack crumbs off himself. He told us we were called to a meeting. Then he left. I got up, helped Bob clean up, and we headed to the conference room. When we arrived, there were already many people there gathered around the TV, listening intently. They were watching the news, and a beautiful anchor woman with a concerned face was delivering the latest updates. "Dear viewers, we are facing a significant challenge. A powerful cyclone is inexorably approaching our state. Local authorities have already announced the need for evacuation in several towns. According to the latest meteorological data, wind speeds and precipitation intensity could reach critical levels, creating potentially dangerous conditions for residents of our communities. Those in the projected impact zone are strongly advised to follow local management instructions and refrain from travel unless it is for evacuation. Please stay safe, keep updated, and do not ignore precautions. We will continue to keep you informed as new information becomes available." After listening to the anchor, our boss turned to us. "You heard the news. This morning, we received a call from the meteorological station, warning of worsening weather and advising us to close the park. I've already ordered notices to be posted about the closure, but there might still be people in the park. Your task is to patrol and warn visitors, as well as ensure their evacuation. Do you understand the assignment?" We nodded in agreement and dispersed. Each employee was responsible for their section of the forest, and Bob and I were in charge of the most remote area. I began getting ready, and we loaded our gear into our pickup truck and set off. After about 20 miles, we stopped at a gravel parking lot. Beyond it were the forest and hills. I looked at the sky, which was already starting to cloud over. We had 2 routes to cover, so to save time and get everything done, we decided to split up. We set off, and soon a fork in the path appeared before us. I checked my cell phone, but there was no signal here. We had a radio, but it couldn't reach the base. The powerful radio was in the car, and if anything happened, we needed to get to it first. After checking the connection, Bob and I parted ways. Walking along the winding path through the hilly forest, I felt the wind growing stronger and colder. The tall trees around me bent under its pressure, creating a rustling sound that grew louder with each passing minute. The sky was increasingly covered with dark clouds, foretelling the impending storm. Strangely, there were no tourists in the park today. Usually there was always someone here, but it seemed the bad weather had scared them away. It was just me, and my footsteps echoed in the forest's silence. Suddenly, something unusual in the sky caught my attention. An airplane, majestically and terrifyingly, was falling to the ground. It was too low, and its wings seemed to be flailing helplessly in the air. My heart froze with worry. The plane disappeared behind a nearby hill, and without hesitation I rushed there. On the way, I radioed Bob. "Bob, old buddy, can you hear me?" "Yes, Jack. Did you see that plane falling? I saw it descending. It must have crashed near you." "Yes, it's not far from me. I'm heading there. You go back to the car and call for backup. By the way, did you find any tourists?" "No, Jack, not a soul around here," Bob replied. "All right then, stay in touch," I said. "Take care, buddy. As soon as I alert the others, I'll head your way." I turned off the radio and continued on. After about 10 minutes, I saw a column of smoke ahead. It was about a mile away. As I pushed through thick bushes, I heard a terrifying scream in the distance. It sounded like someone who had experienced excruciating pain and was very scared. I quickened my pace and soon saw the crash site. As the plane fell, it had apparently hit and broken all the trees in its path. There was a high chance it had made a hard landing. I was right. Ahead, in a small clearing, lay the crashed plane. It was a small turboprop plane with 2 propeller engines. Smoke was coming from the engines, but there were no signs of fire. I sped up, preparing to provide first aid, but as I approached the plane, I was met with a horrifying sight. Next to it, by the rear side door, lay 2 bodies. They were badly mutilated, but I could still make out that they were possibly Latin American. Their bodies were covered in wounds. One had a chunk of flesh missing from his neck as if bitten by some animal, and the other had a similar wound on his thigh. I nearly vomited. Their faces were scratched with deep cuts, indicating they didn't die from the plane crash, but from an attack by some creature. When I realized this, I looked around in fear. Whatever it was, it could still be nearby. But there was no one around. Only the strong wind was blowing, bending the trees. I drew my pistol and continued my inspection. Carefully bypassing the bodies, I peered into the cabin. There, I found large wooden crates scattered around. One of them was overturned and the lid was broken. Bags of white powder had spilled out, one of them torn, with powder scattered all over the floor. The plane might have been carrying drugs, I thought, and continued my search. In the back, I found a large broken cage. The bars bent as if something had forcefully broken out of it. During the flight, some creature must have escaped and attacked the crew. I moved to the cockpit, where a man was lying in one of the seats, a tree branch piercing through his chest and the windshield. Was anyone still alive? I exited the plane and radioed Bob, telling him what had happened. He was very surprised and asked me for details about the incident. After finishing the conversation, I resumed my search. I noticed 2 sets of footprints leading away from the plane, along with animal tracks everywhere. I decided to follow them and set off. As I walked through the forest, Daylight began to fade. Twilight enveloped the forest, and every shadow now seemed deeper and more mysterious. The wind was picking up, driving ahead dark, looming clouds, the harbingers of the storm. I turned on my flashlight and hunched lower, fearing I might lose the tracks. I felt every gust of wind blowing against my clothes and making the trees rustle and creak around me. Every step on the soft forest ground seemed louder than usual, and my heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but all I saw were dense thickets and shadows flickering between the trees. I wondered if Bob had called for backup. Judging by the time, they should be arriving soon. I quickly grabbed the radio to contact him, feeling a growing sense of unease. Pressing the call button, I expected to hear his voice, but only static noise responded. "Hey, can you hear me?" I tried again, but the radio just buzzed back, offering neither response nor comfort. My heart beat faster with anxiety. What happened? Why isn't he answering? Thoughts flashed. Pressing the button again, I attempted to reach him, but all my efforts were drowned in the radio's silent noise. Suddenly, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just a feeling. I instinctively sensed someone's presence. My eyes strained to search the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The air was thick with tension, amplified by the noise of the wind and distant thunder. I quickened my pace, trying not to lose sight of the tracks on the ground. The forest grew darker, and I felt raindrops starting to fall on my face. Every rustle made me flinch. My thoughts revolved around one thing. Who's there? Friend or foe? I wondered if I should turn back, but then I thought these people might need help. Yes, they were smugglers, but still people. My duty compelled me to continue the search. Soon the sky was completely overcast and the rain began to pour. Hastily, I pulled a raincoat from my backpack and put it on, trying to shelter myself from the downpour as quickly as possible. The raindrops drummed on the fabric, adding another layer of noise to the already echoing forest. The ground underfoot became soft and wet. My boots sank into the soaked soil with each step, as if sinking into thick mud. I tried to move faster, but the wet earth resisted, slowing my steps. The tracks on the ground began to fade, becoming less visible under the rain. The storm enveloping the forest was doing its job. I realized I needed to hurry if I wanted to find them. And then, amidst the roar of the wind and the sound of falling water, I heard a scream. It came from a distance but was clear enough to guide me. I ran in that direction, overcoming the resistance of the mud and branches that hindered me. My heart pounded in sync with my rapid steps. All my senses were heightened. I felt every drop of rain, every gust of wind on my face. Instinctively, I drew my pistol from its holster and held it ready. Not knowing what to expect, I continued running towards the source of the scream. Thoughts raced through my mind about what could have happened and the potential danger that might lurk ahead. As I got closer, I saw a Latino man standing in the middle of the forest, in a state of sheer terror. He was looking around, as if fearing something invisible and threatening. I scanned the surroundings but found nothing unusual except for us. When I approached, his face lit up with relief. He rushed towards me, repeating the word, "Help." As soon as he got close, the man hid behind me, still looking around. His eyes were filled with horror, and he kept repeating the words, "Hombre lobo." These words, spoken with such fear, made me tense up. What could have scared this man so much? What had he seen in those woods? At that moment, I heard a rustle in the bushes, and the Latino man next to me started screaming, shouting incomprehensible words in Spanish. I tried to calm him down but kept a firm grip on my pistol, ready for any turn of events. The rain was getting heavier, making visibility increasingly difficult. The rustling in the bushes moved left, then right. It seemed like something was moving around us at incredible speed. I tried to track every sound, turning in different directions, but pinpointing the creature's location was impossible. My heart raced with fear and excitement. And then it happened. A creature within human speed burst out of the bushes right at us. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to react. I only saw a humanoid silhouette. With a sharp strike, it grabbed the man and dragged him into the depths of the forest. I was left standing alone, paralyzed by shock and disbelief at what had just happened. The silence was suddenly shattered by a long, piercing howl from the bushes. This sound made my blood run cold. I realized I had encountered something whose nature and power surpassed everything I had faced before. Thousands of thoughts raced through my mind about what to do next. Part of me wanted to run, but I couldn't ignore the source of that horrifying howl. Gathering my courage, I slowly moved towards the bushes from where the sound came. But as soon as I got closer, something powerful struck me in the chest. The blow was so strong it knocked the wind out of me. I fell on my back, feeling the cold raindrops hitting my face. I tried to reach for my pistol, but it was futile. The weapon had been knocked out of my hands and rolled away. I struggled to gather my strength when suddenly it appeared above me. This creature was hard to describe. Its body was covered in thick fur, and its face was a terrifying mix of human, ape, and wolf features, with something resembling a bat. Its eyes burned with an incredible yellow light, full of rage and madness, and blood dripped from its mouth. Lying there, under the gaze of this monster, I felt that my end was near. Everything seemed so unreal, but the fear I felt was absolutely real. Suddenly, a loud shot rang out to the side. Someone had fired a flare, and it brightly illuminated the sky, its light reflecting off the wet leaves and raindrops. The creature, which had just threatened to tear me apart, flinched and started looking around nervously. It seemed as startled as I was. With incredible speed it retreated, disappearing into the dense forest. I tried to get up, but my body refused to obey me. I felt each gust of wind whipping my face, mixed with the cold raindrops. Suddenly, a man leaned over me. He extended his hand, and I grabbed it, managing to get to my feet. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice urgent and concerned. I looked around, picked up my flashlight and pistol that had fallen nearby. Under the flashlight's beam, I could finally see his face. He was about 45 years old, blonde and tall. He was wearing glasses, which he now wiped from the raindrops streaming down the lenses. "My name is David Miller," he introduced himself. I asked what he was doing in the forest, but David only shrugged vaguely, avoiding a direct answer. This seemed suspicious to me, but at the moment my main priority was to get out of there. I tried to contact Bob again through the radio, but all I heard in response was silence. I tried to remember the direction I had come from and headed that way, but suddenly my path was blocked. We found ourselves surrounded. Numerous powerful flashlights shone blindingly in my face, and AK-47 rifles were pointed at me. My heart froze with fear. "Drop your weapon!" someone shouted from the darkness. Seeing no other way out, I complied. One of the men approached me, and before I could understand anything, I felt a sharp pain in my head from the butt of a rifle. Everything blurred, and I lost consciousness, collapsing into the wet, cold ground of the forest. When I came to, the first thing I felt was the tight ropes binding my hands. Darkness enveloped everything around, and it took me a few moments to adjust to the gloom. Looking around, I realized I was in a tent. The air was stuffy and smelled of smoke. Next to me sat Mr. Miller, his hands also tied. From his expression, I could tell he had already regained consciousness and was assessing the situation. Outside the tent, I heard the crackling of a fire, and through the thin fabric, I could feel the raindrops still beating incessantly against its surface. I tried to talk to Miller to understand what was going on and what our chances of escaping were. But before I could utter a word, voices reached us through the noise of the rain and the crackling fire. They were speaking in Spanish and seemed to be having an animated conversation. It became clear to me that we were not alone in this forest, and that we were being held by no random people. I asked what was happening. Mr. Miller sighed. His face, dimly lit by the light penetrating the tent, looked tired and worried. "We're prisoners," he began slowly. "We fell into a trap set by smugglers. It seems they think we might interfere with their operation or know too much. They might even execute us." After his words, I wondered how he knew so much. I pointed this out to him, to which he said, "All right, I'll tell you my story," Miller began, his voice calm, but I sensed notes of weariness in it. "It happened a couple of years ago. I worked as a botany professor at the University of California, Berkeley. My specialization is tropical plants. As part of one of the research projects, I often visited various corners of Latin America. During one period, while I was in the state of Oaxaca in Mexico, I stumbled upon a secluded village deep in the jungle. It was a place untouched by civilization. The tribe living there was surprisingly friendly. They welcomed me warmly, allowing me to study the local flora and immerse myself in their unique culture. What intrigued me the most was their beliefs and rituals. One day, they led me to an ancient temple hidden deep in the heart of the jungle. It was a truly impressive sight. The temple reminded me of the majestic structures of the Incas. The walls were adorned with ancient murals and drawings, telling the myths and legends of this tribe. But the most striking was the depiction of their main deity, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a wolf. This image was repeated in different parts of the temple, hinting at its central significance in their culture. Miller paused, a thoughtful gleam appearing in his eyes, as if he were mentally transported back to that distant and mysterious moment in his life. "This deity," Miller continued, his voice quieter, "was truly frightening. The tribe called it Tecolotl, which in their language meant night hunter. According to their beliefs, this was a creature with powerful abilities, capable of taking the form of both a man and a wolf. According to legend, Tecolotl was both a protector and an avenger. On full moon nights, it was said to emerge from its temple to guard the village from evil spirits and enemies. But its protection came at a price. It was said to demand sacrifices, and if not satisfied, the werewolf could become a ruthless killer. The temple walls had images depicting it in various scenes, standing on two legs, surrounded by a circle of fire, and on all fours, attacking its victim. Its eyes were always depicted as glowing yellow, and its teeth sharp and bloody. Day after day, I delved into studying the temple's frescoes, striving to decipher every symbol, every image related to Tecolotl. My fascination did not go unnoticed, and one day the tribe's chief noticed my interest. He approached me and said he wanted to show me this god. I was stunned. Do they really believe it's real? I thought. But the chief seemed absolutely serious and confident in his words. He led me to the outskirts of the village, to where the priestess lived. I had never been to that part of the village before, as I was always forbidden to go there. This place was shrouded in mystery and reverence. The priestess's dwelling was separated from the rest of the village, surrounded by various talismans and symbols. The air was filled with a sense of something ancient and mystical. When we entered, the priestess was sitting in the center of the room, surrounded by strange artifacts and religious symbols. Her eyes held deep wisdom and knowledge of secrets inaccessible to mere mortals. The chief explained to her my interest in Teoto, and she nodded, as if understanding something important. She led me through the village, and soon we reached the entrance to a small temple built of stone. Climbing the stone steps, I found myself in a sort of arena covered with sand. In the center of this arena, I saw a creature that at first glance seemed to have emerged from my darkest nightmares. I instinctively wiped my glasses, not believing my eyes. Before me stood a hunched creature gnawing on a goat's skull. Its appearance was both terrifying and mesmerizing. It was covered in fur and had the head of a wolf, but the body of a man, or even an ape. When it noticed us, its movement slowed and it slowly turned its head towards us. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of joy in its eyes upon seeing the priestess. The creature pricked up its ears and grinned in a smile that nevertheless looked horrifying. I stood motionless, trying to understand how this was possible. The priestess slowly and with dignity descended into the arena, and then something amazing happened. The creature, which had just seemed so threatening and terrifying, ran up to her and began nuzzling her like a huge, obedient pet. I watched this scene in complete bewilderment, my gaze shifting to the chief. He, noticing my amazement, explained, "She is his mother and he is her son." I couldn't believe my ears and asked if she had really given birth to this creature. My knowledge of biology and genetics screamed at the impossibility of such a phenomenon. No mutations could turn a human being into what I saw before me. But the chief nodded, confirming his words. I felt reality, in which I had always believed, begin to blur. This was a moment when myths and legends clashed with the scientific understanding of the world. But before my eyes was undeniable proof of something incomprehensible, something I could not explain with any scientific theory. Days went by and I spent each one observing this remarkable creature. I began feeding it, trying to establish contact. At first it was wild and unpredictable, but gradually it seemed to get used to me. Its behavior resembled that of a wolf, cautious and wary, but at the same time curious. Over time, it allowed me to get closer. I cautiously approached it, speaking in a soft, calming voice, sometimes even trying to stroke its fur. At moments, it seemed like a kind of bond was forming between us. But despite these moments of seeming trust, I never forgot that I was facing a true wild beast. There was always unpredictability in its eyes, and its movements remained quick and abrupt. I understood that at any moment, its instincts could take over, and it might behave completely unpredictably. This continued until the tragedy struck. The priestess died after falling from a cliff. After her tragic death, dark times befell the village. She was not just a spiritual leader, but, as I understood, the link between the village and the creature they considered their god, Teoto. Her loss shocked everyone, but most of all, it affected Teoto's behavior. He became much more aggressive and unpredictable, howling and growling more often. One day, when one of the villagers came to feed him, Teoto attacked and killed him. This was a turning point in the village's attitude towards the creature. They decided it was a sign that their god demanded sacrifices. They began sending people to him. Day after day, the creature killed them. I could no longer stay silent seeing innocent people perish. I liked these people, their culture, and way of life. I couldn't stand what was happening. I tried to talk to the chief to convince him it was wrong, that there had to be another way to appease Teoto. But my words fell on deaf ears. In their eyes, I was an outsider who didn't understand their traditions and beliefs. I decided to steal him. I knew this decision would change my life forever, Miller continued. I used my knowledge of drugs to sedate the creature. Local bandits I hired helped me with this. I don't know what the reaction in the village was after our disappearance, but we quickly and quietly transported the creature to a hidden airstrip. My goal was to bring him to the U.S. for further study. I understood that doing this legally was impossible, so I had to turn to the local smugglers. Perhaps this was my biggest mistake. When we were loading the creature onto the plane, it suddenly woke up. But to my surprise, it behaved calmly, as if understanding what was happening. Along with me on board were 4 other people, busy with their cargo. We took off, and I thought everything was going according to plan. We had already crossed the border, and everything seemed calm until one of the smugglers decided to have some fun. I don't know why he wasn't afraid of Teoto. He took out a bag of cocaine and offered it to the creature. I tried to stop him, but another smuggler, laughing, pointed his weapon at me. When Teoto consumed the drug, something changed in him. He seemed to grow in size. His eyes lit up like headlights, and he let out a powerful roar. The smugglers were genuinely frightened. One of them fired a shot, but the creature was unfazed. He forcefully broke the cage and got out. Panic and a struggle for survival ensued. The pilot, seeing what was happening, decided to make an emergency landing. He preferred risking a crash to becoming Teoto's prey. I hid behind the boxes, hoping not to be noticed, and it seems I was lucky. Soon, the plane made a hard landing. One of the pilots died, the other jumped out and fled. Teoto, smashing the damaged door, dragged the bodies outside and began eating them, tearing pieces from each, and then disappeared into the forest. I followed the fleeing pilot. That's when I met you. I used the flare gun to scare the beast away, but unfortunately, it attracted the attention of the drug traffickers. And now here I am, tied up in this tent, telling you all this. Listening to this incredible story, I felt a mix of disbelief and amazement. It sounded like the plot of a horror movie, not a real story. But the concern in Miller's eyes indicated he was telling the truth. Nonetheless, what troubled me most was that I hadn't noticed the presence of a drug trafficking base in my park. How could they have hidden so skillfully? This raised many questions about the safety and reliability of my work in the park. I pondered this, realizing that despite the terrifying power of the creature, humans could be far more dangerous. The drug traffickers holding us captive were unpredictable and ruthless. What they would decide to do with us next was completely unclear. This thought made me feel even more helpless and anxious. We sat in the cramped tent, listening to the wind and rain, when suddenly a noise from outside, a sound of an argument, raised voices, reached us. One of the bandits suddenly pulled back the tent fabric and dragged us outside. The cold wind and rain hit us with renewed force, making it feel like I was in the center of a sea storm. The wet clothes clung to my body, and the wind made me shiver. They led us to a wooden shelter under which a fire was burning, surrounded by a group of people. The firelight flickered on their faces, casting long shadows. I felt like I was in another world, among strangers. in an incomprehensible situation, under the scrutinizing gazes of people who could decide our fate. When the thunder rumbled, it chilled me to the bone. But the real blow was not from the lightning, but from what I saw before me. Among the group of people arguing loudly, I recognized a familiar face. It was Bob, my partner, the person I knew best. Instantly, my mind raced, connecting the events that had seemed unclear until now. Now I understood why Bob hadn't responded to my calls on the radio after I reported the drugs on the plane. Now I understood how the drug traffickers had been able to hide in my park for so long and successfully. But one question still bothered me. Why did Bob do it? Why did he get involved with these people? The answer seemed simple. Perhaps he had lost a large sum of money and this was his way out of the situation. But this knowledge only deepened my sadness and disappointment. I couldn't believe that my longtime colleague and friend had been drawn into such a dark story. When we were brought before Bob and the gang leader, I saw Bob look at me with shame. He lowered his head and quietly said, "Sorry, buddy. I did what I could." I found no words in response. My soul was storming with disappointment and betrayal. I didn't beg him to stand up for me. I felt a profound sense of disappointment, my faith in people deeply shaken. The gang leader, seizing the moment when everyone around was absorbed in the argument and noise, pulled out a pistol and aimed it at us. Bob turned away, unable to look me in the eyes. At that moment, I thought about my family, about how I was supposed to meet them in a couple of weeks. These thoughts of protecting and loving my family filled me, leaving little room for fear or anger. Standing before the barrel of the gun, I realized that suddenly and cruelly, someone's dreams and hopes could be cut short. The life I knew and loved and the people I cared about could disappear in an instant due to the decisions and mistakes of others. It was a bitter realization, but at the same time it gave me the strength to stand with dignity in the face of danger. When the leader unexpectedly turned the gun on Miller, he simply closed his eyes, resigned to his fate. The shot rang out, and Miller fell lifeless to the ground. I couldn't hold back and shouted, "You bastard!" At that moment, an enraged howl echoed in the air, almost simultaneous with my cry. The bandits, gripped by panic, began shouting "Hombre Lobo," while their leader nervously looked around. Suddenly, something incredibly fast burst under the shelter, beginning to ruthlessly destroy everything around. It moved so quickly that people didn't have time to react. Screams and gunfire erupted everywhere. I took advantage of the chaos, threw myself to the side, and ducked. Under the shelter, true chaos unfolded. People screamed in panic, the air was filled with the scent of blood, and shots rang out all around. The creature, like a deadly shadow whirlwind, continued its merciless killing. I lay on the ground, trying to remain unnoticed as madness reigned around me. In the darkness, lit only by the flickering firelight and the flashes of gunfire, the scene seemed apocalyptic. I knew my life hung by a thread, and with each passing second, the chances of survival grew slimmer. Suddenly, a body fell next to me. It was Bob. He looked at me with pleading eyes, blood pouring from his chest, creating a dark stain on the ground. It was Crossfire. In the panic and chaos, the bandits began shooting at each other. I crawled to Bob, trying to understand what he wanted to tell me. He whispered hoarsely, his words barely reaching my ears. I leaned closer to his face, and with his last strength, he grabbed my shirt and whispered, "Run, Jack." After these words, he went limp and his hand loosened. I shouted his name, shaking him, but Bob was no longer responding. In that moment, I realized my friend, with whom we had spent so many years together, gone through many trials and who, despite the betrayal, remained part of my life, was gone forever. Tears involuntarily welled up in my eyes. All the noise and chaos around seemed to recede, leaving me alone with my grief and loss. I sat next to his body, lost in my thoughts, when I suddenly realized I needed to act. Bob's words, "Run, Jack," echoed in my mind like a call to action. I got up, quickly looked around, searching for a path to escape amid the chaos and madness. Deep down, I knew I had to get out of there alive, so these sacrifices and losses wouldn't be in vain. In the darkness of the night, I crawled out from under the shelter and, waiting for a moment when I was at a safe distance, started running with all my might. Behind me, the screams and noise of the battle gradually subsided. Dawn was breaking on the horizon, but I didn't look back, continuing my run. Then I heard a noise behind me. Turning around, I saw the silhouette of the werewolf on the hill, descending towards me on all fours like Gollum. My heart sank, but I decided not to give up. I mentally pictured my wife and daughter, and it gave me new strength. I heard a growl behind me. The creature was closing in. Ahead of me, a cliff and a river suddenly opened up. Realizing this was my only chance, I took a running leap into the water. The current, strengthened by recent rains, immediately carried me away from the shore. I surfaced and looked back. The werewolf stood on the cliff, raised its head and howled, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. The current carried me for several miles before I managed to get to the shore. Climbing onto the bank, I was completely soaked and shivering from the cold and exhaustion. I collapsed on the ground, exhausted but alive. At that moment, I realized I had survived by a miracle, but my heart was shadowed by grief and loss. Sitting on the riverbank, I tried to gather my thoughts and figure out what to do next. Gradually regaining my composure, I headed west. Soon, I stumbled upon a familiar trail and, following it, reached the spot where my car was parked. To my surprise, my colleagues were already there. It turned out that when I stopped communicating, a search party was sent after me. Seeing me in my exhausted and wounded state, they immediately took me to the hospital. On the way, I told them everything that had happened. After that, I finally went home. The incident was reported to the police and other authorities, and my words were confirmed in their investigations. Later, they came to question me, and I told them everything I knew. Access to the park was temporarily closed. After being discharged from the hospital, I decided to say goodbye to the park before leaving for my city. Standing at the edge of the forest, I suddenly heard a howl. It came from afar, from the depths of the forest. I swear it sounded like a werewolf's howl. Perhaps it was a new inhabitant of these places. This sound reminded me of all the mysteries and secrets nature holds, and that the world is full of unexplored and terrifying phenomena.